Today on Locked On Rockies, figuring out what to do with Austin Gomber.
You are Locked On Rockies, your daily Colorado Rockies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Rock on Rockies fans, welcome into the Locked On Rockies podcast for today, the third day of November in the year 2022. I'm your host of the Locked On Rockies podcast, Paul Holden, your Rockies fan extraordinaire, bringing you all sorts of Rockies talk each and every day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where you can find your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day, and if your team is the Colorado Rockies, well, you are in the right spot. That's what we do here. We talk Colorado Rockies baseball all the time. And who the heck am I? Well, I'm your Rockies fan extraordinaire, Paul Holden. Been following the team all my life, been bringing you your daily Colorado Rockies talk for a little over 2 seasons now as well. Been doing a few hundred episodes of this old podcast here as well. So I love the Colorado Rockies. Yes, even when people say, why do you love the Colorado Rockies? Well, there's a lot to love about the Colorado Rockies, even though they're incredibly frustrating at the same time. That's what we do. We talk about it together. We break it down in the live chat. We talk to Rockies fans. We enjoy and celebrate Rockies baseball is what we do here on the Locked On Rockies podcast. You can find us free and streaming on your favorite streaming service. Just look up Locked On Rockies and you'll be taken to where you need to go. And all you also can do is go support us on YouTube. Your subscription to Locked On Rockies on YouTube is a massive help to the show grow. And you'll know when we're live, so you can jump into the live chat. We have a great group of live chatters that jumps in during the show, and we answer questions live here on the show. So if you have a question, you can subscribe. You can hop into the live chat and get it answered live here, because if I see it in the chat, we talk about it, and plenty of people can attest to that. Today on the Locked On Rockies podcast, we are talking about Austin Gomber. Purple Row wrote about Gomber earlier this week, and we're going to talk about it because Austin Gomber is a crucial, critical, important part of the Colorado Rockies, and not only for the team, but the team's history, the team's outlook, and the team's perception from the front office as well. We won't dwell on the fact but you have to bring this up. It's important to remember that Austin Gomber was one of the biggest pieces of the Nolan Arenado trade. The Rockies were really interested in Gomber. And are we going to sit and say that the Gomber experience is worked out for a player like in the Nolan Arenado trade? Has he necessarily been bad? No, the expectations are higher. And when you're in that high profile of a trade, you're looking for more, especially when you're looking at how some of his numbers this past season decreased. But that's also the fact that he spent a good chunk out of the bullpen this year as opposed to starting. But he did also pitch more innings this year. That's one thing that's kind of interesting, where how much of this dynamic, how much of this shift really impacts Gomber, and really what is your plan for Austin Gomber? Is Austin Gomber returning to the rotation? And if so, why didn't he do so earlier last year? Especially when the Rockies, I guess they didn't necessarily need him, especially when they had their rotation figured out and there wasn't health issues. Gomber clearly stepped in and started multiple games. He started 17 games this last season, but that's down 6 games from 21. But the Rockies have now had 2 seasons of Austin Gomber, and it's not necessarily blowing anyone away. There's nothing really about his performance to me that solidifies that he is a piece long-term moving forward. However, he's also a nice, fine addition to the bullpen. He's not really, when the Rockies need a long relief option, when they need a middle relief option to get you multiple innings, having Austin Gomber in your bullpen and the one to turn to isn't the worst thing in the world. But again, it just all circles back to, what's your plan with this player? And why is he, and why were you so high on this player? And why was it part of this deal when you haven't been able to figure out what you want to do with this pitcher in 2 full seasons now? It seemed like it was a no-brainer, and for sure he was a starter. When Gomber kind of quietly, mind you, ended up in the bullpen, It was surprising. And when Chad Kuhl really wasn't doing it for you at the end of the year, wasn't really doing much in the second half of the season, why wasn't Gomber given more opportunities there? But then again, you look at the numbers and he pitched more than he's ever pitched for anybody this year. And his finishing line was a 5.56 ERA, a 5-7 win-loss record in 124 innings, 95 strikeouts with a whip of 1.372. I mean, that's not that good. It's not that good. And when you're in the Rockies position, and this is why when we're talking about a potential other trade of Brendan Rodgers, when you are trading, if you are moving on from the highest quality caliber players, you need to be getting those impact back. And I know the Rockies are more believe that's coming in the prospect form. I understand that. But it begs the question, and it makes you think, if the Rockies haven't been able to figure out what they want to do with Austin Gomber, haven't been able to get a lot and a ton out of Austin Gomber in terms of great production, fine enough production, yes, but again, whip of 1.372 and a career whip of 1.34, 95 strikeouts is a good thing for sure. But it's just, there should be something more. It's encouraging that less walks this year for Gomber. When opposed to his first year, he was able to cut the walks down by seven less walks in and again in about 9-ish more innings pitched. It's something you have to factor in and think about. If this is the type of pitching that the Rockies are targeting when they're making big moves, or at least it was with Bridich, and maybe the Cardinals were just so in on Arenado, they were the ones that calling the most. Maybe if Bridich would have looked around a little bit more, they would have been able to get different type of pitching. But moving a player of Arenado's caliber, I'm expecting to have you to get in return, even if he's not the main focus. The prospects are the focus. That's fine. Montero and Tovar could be the main focus, the main stage. But I'm expecting someone that's going to contribute more to the team. Because again, the way and the amount of production that you are getting from the player you're trading away hasn't been matched yet. But again, Gomber was kind of the fall guy in a way of that trade. And are we really upset about Gomber's performance this year? In a way, yes. I mean, it's not good that Austin Gomber fell out of the rotation after 1.5 seasons. It's not good that Austin Gomber was replaced by Chad Kuhl and Jose Arenas. Chad Kuhl is or Gomber is supposed to be your fourth starter. And while a shift to the bullpen, especially with this Rockies bullpen and the lack of depth there, Gomber kind of makes sense, and it seems like he was able to make the transition a little bit better, but I'm still not sold that that's enough. I need Gomber to perform closer to his rookie season in 2018, going 6-2. He starts 11 games in that season. He plays in 29. He gets 75 innings there, and it's a much better a line. The whip, not so much. The whip has gone. It went down, and then it's kind of gone back up. It tricked up this year. It's another interesting thing with Gomber as well. 4 wild pitches, more wild pitches, the most wild pitches of his career. You wonder what that type of factoring in of the shift, and I wonder what that does for Gomber as well. I'm just trying to figure out, is there enough from Gomber to what about Austin Gomber brings us confidence, and why it is an interesting question, and we're going to dive into that in just a second. But before we do that, if you've thought about securing your home with home security but are putting it off, you will want to listen of. Right now, Locked On Rockies listeners can order the #1 rated SimpliSafe home security system for 50% off. This is the biggest offer of the year from SimpliSafe, and you won't want to miss it. Here is why. SimpliSafe makes sure that you are secure, and they are able to back it up with award-winning performance. SimpliSafe was named the best home security system of 2022 by U.S. News and World Report for the third year in a row. In an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agents use the Fast Protect technology exclusively from SimpliSafe to capture critical evidence and verify the threat is real, so you can get priority police response. SimpliSafe is whole home security with advanced sensors for every room, window, and door. HD security cameras for inside and out, smarter ways to detect motion that alert you only when a threat is real, and even hazard sensors that detect fires, floods, and other threats to your home. 24/7 professional monitoring service costs less than $1 a day, less than half the price of ADT's traditional professionally installed system. With the top-rated SimpliSafe app, stay in complete control of your system anytime, anywhere. Arm or disarm, unlock for a guest, access your cameras, or adjust system settings. Don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system recommended by the experts at U.S. News World Report. It's get a 50% off your new SimpliSafe system at simplisafe.com/locked-on-MLB. This is their biggest discount of the year, so don't wait. That's simplisafe.com/locked-on-MLB. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. At Rock's Hot Takes says, do you think Gomber could get DFA'd? No, Gomber will not get DFA'd. Gomber performs enough and is your best long relief option. We saw multiple times in this instance or this season that the Rockies needed someone to get 3 innings, to pitch from even as early as the 4th up until the 7th. The Rockies need Austin Gomber. It's fine that Austin Gomber fills a role, but it's the reputation that Gomber unfortunately has to bear to shoulder while he's here in a Rockies uniform. And as the King, as King says there, he does need to perform better. I think he expects more from himself. I don't necessarily sit here and think that he's all that excited that he got moved to the bullpen this year. I don't necessarily think that moving to the bullpen should be something that's like always a kind of a bad thing. But being a starting pitcher, or the expectation is you're a starting pitcher, and and that's been your whole philosophy for a bit. I'm sure it's a big change, and I'm sure it wears on the mentals. So I think that that's something to consider. But no, I if the Rockies DFA Austin Gomber, fans like us should not be happy. That is 2 years, and then you go from that in that path. It's just simply not enough. And yeah, so that would be if that happens, consider me shocked, especially with the lack of starting pitching depth and decent bullpen pitching depth with the Rockies. I would say that would be a long shot for Gomber. Let's go over here to Purple Row, crafting a game plan for Austin Gomber by Mario DeGens. 2022 was a rough season for Austin Gomber. After showing a good amount of promise in 2021, pitching to a very solid 4.53 ERA, 106 ERA plus across 23 starts, and beginning 2022 as their clear-cut 4th starter, he struggled to a 5.97 ERA, losing his spot in the rotation in late June, mid-July. His ERA did drop to 4.68 since being moved to the bullpen in late July, but the Rockies have been adamant about seeing Gomber as a starter long-term, and it's not hard to see why. After all, this is a guy who was quite solid last season as a starter, and as we'll see, has the tools to get guys out multiple times every 5 games. Let's see. They need to make one thing clear about Austin Gomber's 2022 season, Mario says. While his ERA did jump by overrun, other peripherals and ERA estimators were far kinder to Austin Gomber. When you're looking at his all of the numbers, the extra statty numbers, the really nitty gritty of baseball stats here, ERA does increase, but his FIP, his xFIP, his SIERA, and then, I mean, that one's even above me, and his xERA all drop, except for the xERA. The xERA is the increase, but FIP, xFIP, and SIERA, all these ERA factors all dropped for Gomber. Mario follows that up by saying, now he did pitch a bit worse in 2022 compared to 2021. His strikeout rate dipped from a very solid 23% to a poor 18%, and his fastball got annihilated, parentheses, again. But it wasn't 5.56 ERA bad, which is why it was puzzling to Mario that he was removed from the starting rotation at all, considering the lack of options the Rockies had. However, water under the bridge and all that, he wanted to get that out of the way before actually tackling Gomber as a pitcher, because there are the discrepancies between ERA and there's so many numbers that it's nice that when you kind of have to look at more, and that's why I like to look at things like Purple Row and people that write stuff, because then they break it all down for us. Austin Gomber has 3 quality non-fastballs. It's the main draw of Austin Gomber for Mario. The lefty is one of the holy grails of starting pitching, which is 3 good non-fastballs, each with its own shape and velocity range. Gomber throws a slider in the 83 to 86 miles per hour range, a changeup in the 81 to 83 miles per hour range, and a big curveball that sits anywhere between 74 and 77 miles per hour. All of them have significant enough differences in shape, too. Having that complete slider, changeup, curveball mix is a blessing because it means a few things. The Rockies don't have to theorize a new pitch out of thin air. They can attack both righties and lefties, and they can create defined roles for each pitch. And I agree with that. Great depth there in having those non-fastball pitches, especially when you're looking to generate weak contact, when you're pitching for that. And we see how much pitchers can do crazy stuff with. I mean, Gomber has, when that curveball is on and it looks like he misthrows it and it's going to go into the stands and it just breaks down in for a strike is a thing of beauty. Gomber's got the tools. As we talked a little bit here, there is potential, there is more, and having that foundation of multiple pitches to use for your arsenal demonstrates more that Gomber is a starter versus someone out of the pen. That versatility in that pitch mix out of the pen is great, sure, but it's going to keep you out of some situations more often than not if Gomber's fastball can stop getting lit up. A couple of things also that Mario comments that Gomber does well: unconventional release point, and I want you to go read all the rest of the stuff, so I'm just kind of hitting you with the headline versions of it. So if you want to dive down more into it, go check out Purple Row here. But he also adds that Gomber has no strike throwing problems. That's his last one. So he's got 3 quality non-fastballs, an unconventional release point, and no strike throwing problems. But what he doesn't well, and this is a huge, key, big issue for me, and it was across for Rockies pitching this year, especially the fastball. The fastball needs to be better for the Rockies. You can't. It just looked like so many times the Rockies were piping heaters down the middle of the plate, and with how hard it is to hit, that's what pitchers will never miss. If they see a fastball that they can jump on and feast on, they are going to crush it. Let's read here from Mario. This is the root cause of almost all of Gomber's issues as a hurler. Gomber throws 1 fastball, a 4-seamer. Since becoming a Rocky, opponents have slashed .338, .411, .591 with an 11.7% strikeout rate against Austin's heater. That's a 1.004 OPS and only 13 points behind what Todd Helton slashed in his first full 10 seasons in the big leagues: .333, .432, .485, 1.014, 117 with an 11.7 strikeout rate. Needless to say, that's quite bad, and more than enough to counteract his 3 good pitches. Opponents have slashed .212, .253, .372 with a 25.9% strikeout rate against Gomber's slider, curveball, and changeup combined in 21 and 22. What's wrong with the 4-seamer? Well, it's got a lack of velocity, it's got a vertical approach angle, and that's really a big issue. The velocity there needs to be more heat to Gomber, but does he need to really use that fastball? If he's having that success with those other off-speed pitches, why not lean into and use those off-speed pitches some more? But velocity does matter. I mean, when you're seeing it, when you're going after it, it's an important thing to be able to put some smoke on the ball, because hitters are just so good at adjusting and able to see that quick A 90, it's crazy to say like a 93 mile an hour fastball isn't fast enough. But it's an interesting thing. But one of the big things, there's a bunch of things that Mario goes into. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do to fix the fastball, but he recommends going with the sinker. The sinker there's a few reasons why the sinker is his choice. First of all, we went for a sinker and not a cutter because the hypothetical cutter doesn't really have a spot in Gomber's arsenal. So he's out there. They're arguing to use instead of the traditional four seam, do a sinking fastball. His slider is pretty firm and sharp for his fastball velo, typically only around 6 to 7 miles per hour slower than his heater. So don't really have a big gap in shape or velocity to sneak our cutter into. Cutters excel when used as the bridge between a fastball and a bigger, slower breaking ball. But when a pitch already has a sharp slider, the cutter doesn't have a real purpose. We talked about vertical approach angle. That was one thing I just kind of highlighted on. Gomber's high release point can be a plus, so we can hypothetically create some truly steep approach angles down in the zone with a sinking fastball. So that's what, that's kind of an interesting thing. I don't want to, they do a ton of work and a ton of a deep dive. And I think you should really go read all of this. We don't have time to dive into it, but it's an interesting thought process there from the folks at Purple Row and Mario DeGen's over there. So go read more about their plans to fix Austin Gomber and including the pitch replacements there on Purple Row. We're going to talk a little bit about something really cool that happened and something that I was quite surprised and honestly surprised I didn't hear more about today. But first, check this out. I was listening again, I was listening to the Dan Le Batard show again, and then they got some people that aren't necessarily the biggest baseball fans. And something that took me off guard was calling a combined no-hitter in the World Series not that big of a deal. And it just seemed crazy to me. Folks, let me make it abundantly clear. I think it's always cool when a no-hitter happens. It's so hard to do. And I know it's not necessarily the most rare things, but to do it in the World Series, especially combined or not, is incredible. That is the biggest stage. And 4 pitchers were able to combine to do something wild. The differences in pitch length and how many pitches are needed to get out of innings and the factors that go into it, there should never, ever be anything that takes away from a pitcher throwing a no-hitter, no matter what the situation is, whether it's combined or not. To hold a Major League Baseball team hitless for 27 outs is an incredible accomplishment and should be something that is celebrated all the time. This should be a massive big deal. And I know in baseball spheres, and I know around there it is, but it's just interesting when you kind of think about it on the big grand scheme of things. This should have been more dominating, I think, in the world of sports media, but maybe I'm not as tuned in, or maybe I'm not as focused. And, I know it might be the Astros, but it's still an incredible feat. So even if it happens in the regular season, I think no-hitters combined or solo, whatever they are really, really cool. And boy, what a weird and interesting World Series we're seeing here with the Phillies and the Astros, with just the home run explosion from the Phillies in one, leading into the buzzsaw and the domination that is the Astros rotation and bullpen, leading to a no-hitter. That's good baseball. That's exciting. That's some good, entertaining, and engaging 2 different styles of play coming together. But I don't think I am pro no-hitter no matter how it happens. And yes, it's obviously a bigger accomplishment if just one pitcher does it, but at the same time, it's still a combined no-hitter. It's still a no-hitter. It's definitely not a no-hitter. I don't, those people that, and then the added layer of doing it in the World Series. Really, really cool. Folks, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Rockies. Thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day. Now that you made us your first listen of the day, why don't you go check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast and make that your second listen of the day. You can also stay up to date with all things Colorado sports with the Locked On Broncos, Locked On Avalanche, and the Locked On Nuggets podcast. Thanks to those tuning into the live chat and asking your questions. You can get your questions answered live by subscribing to Locked On Rockies on YouTube and popping into the show when we go live. You can also find us on Twitter at LO Rockies. You can find me at Paul Holden 33. And folks, this is the Locked On Rockies podcast, your daily source for the Colorado Rockies podcast. And until next time, I'm Paul Holden saying so long from